It was a cold, rainy October night when I first heard the knock. Living alone in an old house on the outskirts of town had always given me a sense of peace. The house was tucked away in the woods, far from the noise of the city. It was an old place, with creaky floors and walls that seemed to groan with the wind, but it felt like home to me. That night, however, the atmosphere felt different. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees, making the house feel more isolated than usual. Then at midnight, I heard it. 3 knocks at the door, soft but deliberate. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe the wind had blown something against the house. But then, the knocks came again, louder this time. I froze, my heart beginning to race. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no one ever visited me out here, especially not in the middle of the night. My phone had no missed calls or messages, so who could it be? Cautiously, I approached the front door and peered through the peephole, but the rain was coming down so hard I couldn't see anything. The knocks continued, slow and steady, sending a shiver down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked the door and cracked it open, just enough to peek outside. No one was there. The porch was empty, drenched in rain, and the driveway was barely visible through the sheets of water. My heart was still pounding as I stepped outside to look around, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to close the door, something on the porch caught my eye. Sitting in the middle of the porch, soaked from the rain, was an old black rotary phone. The sight of it made my skin crawl. I didn't own a phone like that, and I couldn't imagine why someone would leave it there. It looked ancient, like it had been sitting in someone's attic for decades. I picked it up, bringing it inside to dry off, thinking maybe it was a prank. As soon as I set it down on the kitchen table, the phone rang. The sound was loud, piercing, and unnatural in the quiet of the house. I stared at it for a moment, completely frozen. The phone wasn't even plugged in, and yet it was ringing. Against every instinct I had, I answered it. "Hello," I whispered, barely able to speak over the lump in my throat. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just static. Then I heard a faint voice like someone was whispering, but it was distorted, garbled, like it was coming from far away. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sounded urgent, desperate. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The static continued, and then, through the crackling noise, I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, speaking clearly this time. "Look outside!" My stomach dropped. I slowly turned toward the window, my heart thundering in my chest. The rain was still pouring, but now I could see something, or someone, standing just at the edge of the trees. A figure barely visible in the downpour, standing completely still. The phone rang again, its shrill sound making me jump. I answered it with trembling hands, afraid of what I might hear next. "I'm coming closer," the voice whispered. I felt my blood run cold. I looked out the window again, and sure enough, the figure was moving. Slowly, steadily, it was stepping out from the trees and making its way across the yard. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it was struggling to walk. Panic surged through me. I dropped the phone and backed away from the window, my heart racing. The figure was getting closer, and I could feel an overwhelming sense of dread filling the room, like the air had turned to ice. The phone rang again, but I couldn't bring myself to answer it this time. I could hear the figure's footsteps now, splashing through the puddles in my yard, getting closer and closer. I rushed to the door, locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house felt suffocatingly quiet, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the faint ringing of the phone. And then, the knocking started again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the door, just like before. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The phone rang one last time, and I knew somehow that the voice would be on the other end, waiting for me. I stared at the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob when the voice came through the phone, louder now, as though it was right outside. "I'm here." The doorknob turned. It started on the first night I moved into my new apartment. It was a small, old building in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was perfect for me. The only unusual thing was the large antique mirror hanging in the hallway. I hadn't noticed it during the tour, but it was too heavy and bolted to the wall to move, so I left it there. That first night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard something faint. A whisper. It was so quiet that I convinced myself it was just the wind outside. I turned over, pulled the covers up, and fell asleep. The next night, the whispering came again, but this time it was closer. I couldn't make out the words, just the low, indistinct sound of a voice. It seemed to be coming from the hallway near the mirror. Curiosity got the better of me, so I got up and walked over to it. The hallway was dimly lit by the soft glow of a street lamp outside, and the mirror reflected my silhouette. I stood there staring at my own reflection for what felt like forever, but the whispering had stopped. That's when I noticed it. My reflection didn't look quite right. It was subtle at first, a slight delay when I moved, the way my eyes didn't seem to follow me exactly. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized something was wrong. My reflection wasn't just mimicking my movements anymore. It was smiling. I wasn't. A chill ran down my spine, and I backed away. The reflection stopped smiling, but it didn't match my expression. It was watching me. Panicked, I ran back to my bedroom and slammed the door, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I barely slept that night, every creak and groan of the old building making me jump. The next day, I avoided the mirror entirely. I knew it sounded ridiculous, being afraid of a reflection, but something about it felt off. I even considered covering it up, but I didn't. A part of me didn't want to admit I was scared. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whispering again, louder this time, clearer. It was coming from the hallway, from the mirror. "Come closer." The voice was soft, but insistent. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block it out, but the whispering continued, growing more persistent. "Look at me." I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, stormed out into the hallway, and faced the mirror. But this time, my reflection wasn't there. The mirror was empty. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I heard the voice again, this time from behind me. "I'm here." I turned slowly, but there was nothing in the hallway, only shadows. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection had returned, but it was different. The eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to stretch into nothingness, and that same twisted smile was spread across its face. I felt something cold brush against my neck, like icy fingers, and I knew I wasn't alone. I haven't looked at the mirror since. I've covered it with a heavy sheet, but sometimes late at night, I hear the whispering start again. It wants me to look.